Hey Nathan,
Hey, Amanda.
how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Where are you at today?
I'm in Portland, Oregon for WordCamp US, which is the national conference for WordPress.
Cool. Well, thank you for taking the time to sit down and record the podcast.
Of course, we can't miss one.
We can't miss one. We are trying out a different format today, so we're just going to jump right into things. Today, we're talking about a very interesting topic, which is as a company, whether you have a tech stack or tech suite. Nathan knows a lot about this. Nathan started a couple of his own companies, has a lot of experience with building out the infrastructure. So, Nathan, I'm going to turn it over to you to define some of these terms for our listeners before we get into some of the questions. So, can you define tech stack versus suite and ERP? What does it all mean?
Sure. And before we jump into ERP, basically any product will kind of lean towards a stack approach or a suite approach. So you've probably used software in the past that is a suite of tools, like it can do everything in a category, but it doesn't do any one of those things well. Like if you've ever seen a Swiss Army knife, right? It does everything. It has scissors, it has a knife, it has a screwdriver, but of course, none of those things are as good as any of the individual tools. You can have a much better screwdriver, a much better knife, a much better pair of scissors if you have those things individually that are specialized tools. But it is convenient to have it all in one and to have it all together. And so we see the same thing in software where there's one tool that you can use to run your business or a tool that does multiple things, but none of them are that great. If it's a task manager and an invoicing system and a customer portal and a contract signing thing for your customer, right? There are those kind of tools like for service based companies, and it will do all of those things, but it doesn't do any of them super well, right? And that's not going to be the best, but it's all in one place. You can run a report and you can see all those different parts, all the pieces talk to each other. And then the stack approach is the opposite. Like you choose the best in class tool, very highly specialized tools, the best solution there is available for specific things. Like I will choose the best invoicing system, and I will choose the best contract signing system, and I'll choose the best time tracking. But then you have to kind of string them together. You've created your own stack of tools, and they might have a native integration, or they might just live separately, and you just know like where one system begins and the other one ends. Like I know will send them the estimate in this system. They're going to sign the contract and approve it in this system, which then is going to create the invoice over here. And then I'm going to go and do my project management and tasks in another tool. And I just kind of there's a sequence, and maybe the overlap isn't that important, um, but you've assembled the best kit of tools instead of walking around with a Swiss Army knife, right? I'm bringing the best tools to the job that I can apply. So there's going to be that tension, and there's a spectrum, obviously, across all of this. But the more that a tool does, the less likely it's going to do it super well.
I love the tool analogy because I can totally picture this. And I'm thinking about a toolbox. I'm like, yeah, it requires a little bit more organization because you need to know what's in your toolbox. It's a little bit more to kind of put together, but I'm thinking about the two and I'm like, I'm entering into a situation and I'm like, do I want my toolbox or my Swiss Army knife? I guess it depends on the situation, right? What's the difference between a suite versus ERP?
Well, I said there's kind of a spectrum of this, right? You can pick like highly specialized tools, or maybe there's a product that does two or three of those things, but it's still kind of specialized, and you might have a stack of like mini suites. But ERP is the most extreme end of that spectrum. So an ERP is enterprise resource planning. Typically, it's going to be like SAP or NetSuite or sometimes an implementation of Salesforce, right? Consultants are required to come and implement these very kind of arduous systems, and you can configure them, but they're very rigid. And then everybody in the company has to switch the way they're doing business, and everybody has to shift on to this NetSuite or SAP setup. And it takes over everything, right? It takes over your invoicing, it takes over your accounting, it takes over your customer website, it takes over your customer portal, it could take over customer support. Every single thing is a module in this mega system. Anybody who've ever talked to has had to implement one of these systems or have to work at a company as one of these things is implemented, will just lament this whole process. It's it's part of that soul sucking corporate culture. It's like bureaucracy at its finest. The reason a business will implement one of these systems is because they've reached such an extreme pain of like all the departments are siloed, nobody knows what each other is doing. You can't hold anybody accountable because there's such chaos and noise in all of the data and reporting. All of the reporting is siloed, and people are pushing everything into spreadsheets and trying to reconcile these numbers. And there's just a complete disconnect across the company. So these things get implemented for a reason, and those are totally valid and real reasons. But kind of brute forcing the entire company into this monolithic ERP system is something that everybody hates, and it really slows down a lot of the business. And there's a huge implementation cost, like you have to hire consultants and developers and custom modules, and then you have to migrate all of your stuff. I mean, it's a six-figure project up front in cash to do that. Not to mention these implementations can take 3 months, 6 months, a year. I've heard of one taking 3 years where very little got done in the company operationally for customers or for sales or for product or for marketing because everybody was just switching to this system. So I think the costs of this are very high. And then at the end of the day, you're using this suite of tools that all of them are very clunky and limited, and you're locked in and can't even really improve your processes because you're on this monolithic system.
I was curious about any more specific numbers about what sort of costs you might run into implementing this system.
If we use like NetSuite as an example, a consultant will charge for NetSuite like $50,000, $75,000. That kind of covers a very vanilla installation of NetSuite, and then you need additional modules, and you might need developers to come and build custom modules because your business is, of course, a little bit different than the cookie cutter mold. So then there's additional cost there, and then migration is a really heavy cost that comes up because you want to pull in your like 8 years of historical data, but there's often a lot of cleanup of old data that was messy. So the migration costs will really rack up as well, and the custom development. So most of those projects will push into the six figures easily. And again, regardless of that cash cost, the operational cost is enormous for your entire company.
It's hard sometimes to you forget about the hidden costs or almost the ancillary costs because you're looking at this number on a sheet. This is what it will cost you to implement this system, but you don't necessarily think of all the opportunity costs of your employees working on implementing the system instead of what they were hired to do full time. And what does that do to business in the short term, but also in the long term, right? How much of a slowdown does that cause for your business moving forward? So that's really interesting. And you mentioned a couple of the pitfalls or some of the negatives of implementing this sort of system, but what would you say are some of the biggest benefits?
I think the C-suite, like the executives in a company, they are very happy with the implementation because they finally have information about what's going on in the company. They can finally have a full picture. They can have these end-to-end reports that touch multiple parts of the business, and they're the people purchasing it, right? Like that, those are the ultimate customers. They're the ones approving the budgets, and they are happy with the outcome because it's about reporting and visibility through the company and helping make smarter, data-driven decisions and prioritizations within the company. So there is a happy group of people. It's just not the majority of people, and it's not where the work is getting done. Everybody else is way less effective and slowed down and has their hands tied, like for the rest of the business operating.
Yeah. And so what I'm hearing as you're mentioning the clear benefits of them, but then I hear you keep kind of skewing back to some of the negatives and some of why it doesn't work. And you mentioned what the other option is, which is building a tech stack.
Mhm.
So can we get into that? What's the tech stack like at N squared?
Yeah. So it's probably no secret that we have the stack approach as I've been kind of leading it. Has been very obvious this whole episode. I think having the best in class tools is the most important thing for doing the best work. And reporting is super important. You do need both. You need that information, that visibility, which, of course, is no surprise why we built BlinkMetrics, which is our product, to help with that centralization and bringing that central source of truth and clean data and then reporting and visibility. Um, so we can use the best tools available. Like our developers can work in GitHub, and our marketing and project planning team can work in Asana, and our sales can work with Pipedrive. What we've been developing is allowing you to choose the best module that you want. Like maybe your team likes any of these individual tools, but all those can feed into one central data warehouse, and then we can build reports that look across these systems. So you can build a report and you can see data from sales, from marketing, from your customers inside of your product, from customers visiting your website, um, from how much money you're spending on ads, and how much work is getting done inside of your project management system. You can bring all of those pieces and you can see them side by side, which is the benefit that an ERP delivers. With BlinkMetrics, we can deliver the same thing, but let you use the best in class tools that your team wants to use, which I think is better operationally because you're not using clunky tools. Like you're using the best tools available. Your hands aren't tied. If there's a better tool tomorrow, you can switch to that one. And you can give your teams and departments incredible autonomy. You can say developers go use the best stack you can do to write the best code you can possibly build, and if they decide that tomorrow they want to switch to something else, they can, and you can still get that centralized reporting. So there's a great amount of flexibility that you're giving your team and autonomy that you're giving to your team.
You mentioned earlier this term native integrations. Can you define what native integrations is? Because I think it has to do with this tech stack approach.
Yeah, so there's common enough stacks that the individual companies have recognized and they build an integration um, between them. Like GitHub doesn't want to build project planning stuff that marketers like, and Asana doesn't want to build code management. So they build a native integration. And so it removes some of that friction from using these two systems. It often doesn't go incredibly deep, depends on the partnership and the integration, how deep it goes. But there's some kind of acknowledgement that, like, yeah, there's some friction here. We're removing some of it. Um,
Mhm.
Typically, those integrations they tie together at an operational or task level. The reporting is usually not part of an integration.
Okay, so the actual work being done, the two systems are talking to each other.
Yeah,
But what you're saying is that they're not going to build an incredibly deep integration that like blends their entire system together. They're just trying to reduce friction as much as possible so that no users leave either system. But they're also not spending their resources developing kind of this co-branded integration. They're still focused on their own business for the most part.
yeah. And another common example would be like a CRM. Typically there's going to be a marketing website somewhere, and the CRM is not getting into the business of building websites, and website tools are not in the business of building CRMs. So there'll be a light integration where the CRM says, put this little code here, and then every time somebody submits a form on your website, we're going to pull in their information and load it into a contact in the CRM, which is a great way of removing some of that friction. But again, it's like at a operational level, it's removing some of the overhead of that. It's tying these two together so I can build my website on whatever and I can have my CRM and they're tied together. But you're not going to have reporting.
Mhm.
It's not going to show you how people got to your website and that entire customer journey of somebody going through marketing and then into sales, right? The reporting angle is usually missing in those integrations.
How does BlinkMetrics help in terms of reporting between systems?
Yeah, so BlinkMetrics will take all of these best in class tools that you're using in your stack and it will pull the data from those systems into one place so that you can then build reports that pull data from across all of those tools. So you don't have these siloed reports. Of course, by default, you can go into your CRM and you can see sales reports, and you can go into your Google Analytics and see your marketing data and look at reports there. And you can go into your project management system and see how the execution of projects is going. You have three browser tabs and you kind of have to reconcile them. You can't get that holistic view. Um, but BlinkMetrics will enable that. BlinkMetrics will get all of that data into one place, and then you can get it out any way that you want. In addition to that custom report that can show all of it, one of the simplest things that we end up encountering again and again with clients that we talk to is that they're happy with their individual systems. Like the salespeople have lots of great saved reports in their CRM. The marketers have lots of great saved reports in their analytics tools. But people in other departments don't have good visibility of what's going on in the other ones, or the executive who's trying to figure out how the whole business is going doesn't have a good view of how everything is going. So pulling like the top 3 or 5 numbers out of each system and putting them in one place is something that we can help with. And it's something that naturally happens with the business as usually somebody fires up an Excel or Google sheet and they will start, once a month or something, they'll paste in a number from these systems like, what was our total volume in sales? What was our total volume in support tickets? How many leads did we get? Right. And somebody's plugging those numbers in, and BlinkMetrics can meet those companies where they're at, where like they're already doing these things. They're already have this administrative overhead to try to reconcile this, and we can pull out those 3 numbers from each department and put it in one place so an executive can see the whole company, or so the head of marketing can see how sales is going, or how the sales department can see how support is doing after their sale. So you can give this nice visibility to everyone in the organization.
From the sales and marketing perspective, one of my favorite things is that a couple of the KPIs we look at every week are development tasks. How many bugs do we currently have open? How much velocity or how quickly is the development team working on building the product and closing out bugs? And for me, I don't have a GitHub login. GitHub seats are very expensive. It wouldn't make sense for me to have a whole login to see that number. But because those KPIs are being pulled every week, I can have a very high level view on like, how's the development team doing? How are our engineers doing? What is their workload kind of looking like? And that just helps me from my perspective. I sort of know what's going on, but it's not costing the company any extra money, and it's not requiring me to, bother the developers and ask a ton of questions over Slack or something. The numbers are just there, and it just saves so much time, but it still gives me visibility.
Yeah, and even if you had a GitHub login, you probably wouldn't want to use it and go diving for the report over there.
No, no. Just what I've heard about GitHub is that it's so beyond my technical understanding that even logging into the system, I think I would feel immediately like I don't belong here. I shouldn't I shouldn't be here. I don't want to be here.
Yeah, I think you could figure it out, but yeah, you don't want to be there. Is the it's the greater issue.
Yeah, yeah. All right. I know you've got to go in a couple of minutes. So I think my last question for you is what sort of recommendations might you make to other companies about if they're considering these two approaches?
Yeah, I think uh, I'm pretty set in the stack approach. I mean, if you're running your business online, there are very specialized tools that are very good. It's a very competitive landscape, so like you want to be using the best tools you can, and it moves so quickly. Look at any online software that you were using 10 years ago, and it's a totally different world, right? New things come up every day, and you want to have the option to use those things, right? You want to have the option to be using the best tools as they come out. Even if you love NetSuite, even if everybody in your company loves that experience of using an ERP, which I've never heard, but if everybody in your company loves that experience, like it's still just not a good strategic decision to be tied to one vendor. Like now your switching cost is like enormously higher, right? There's only a few of these ERP systems, and switching between them is incredibly uncommon. So you've tied yourself to one vendor for the rest of your life of your business, or like there's some incredible painful point in your future that's even worse than getting on the ERP will be getting off of the ERP. This one system who could also like go out of business or get acquired and 10x your price. So to me, it just seems too high of a cost and a risk for a business to go that route.
ERP, not for me. Official tagline.
There you go.
I know you've got to go. Good luck at the conference.
All right. Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, Nathan. Bye.